You'd make everything uncomfortable, Olivia. My mother's voice was smooth and sharp all at once, a tone she'd perfected through years of cutting me down without ever raising it. She didn't even look at me as she folded the cream-colored guest list at the kitchen island, her diamond bracelet catching the morning light. I stood there, holding my mug of black coffee, staring at the faint steam curling upward like smoke from something that had quietly burned too long. Everyone was invited to my sister's wedding except me. The words hung between us unspoken but certain. Grace's big day had consumed every conversation in our family for months. Guest lists, menu tastings, floral palettes, the perfect playlist for her sunset vows. It was all that existed. Now with the seating chart almost final, my mother had delivered her verdict. I wouldn't be attending. I wasn't even on the list. I understand, I said, though the words tasted bitter. My name is Olivia Hayes. I'm 28, and I plan weddings for a living destination weddings, editorial shoots, impossible fairy tales that other people actually get to live. I've created dream days for hundreds of couples in Greece, Bali, Paris, but somehow I'm the one person who's too much for my own family's celebration. You do understand, my mother replied, still arranging the pages, as though I were a client she needed to manage. Grace's wedding has to be perfect. You have a presence. People notice you. And this weekend isn't about you. There it was. The lifelong accusation I was too visible, too outspoken, too alive for her version of proper. I lifted my mug, taking a slow sip to stop my hands from shaking. It's fine, Mom. I won't ruin her perfect day. Her eyes finally met mine, cold blue and appraising. I'm glad you see it that way. I walked out of the kitchen before my composure cracked. In my car, the silence pressed against me like a weight. I scrolled through photos on my phone, bouquets, smiling couples, champagne under fairy lights. I'd built a career celebrating love, authenticity, the quiet truth that weddings weren't about spectacle but about meaning. And yet in my family, meaning never mattered as much as appearances. Grace, my younger sister, had always been the golden child. Petite, soft-spoken, agreeable. She'd followed every rule, and my mother rewarded her for it. Now she was marrying Daniel Hartman, a lawyer from one of Charleston's oldest families. Their wedding would be elegant, traditional, tasteful, all the things my mother valued more than warmth or honesty. That evening, the family gathered for dinner at my parents' colonial home. White candles glowed against crystal glassware. The air smelled of rosemary and control. Daniel was charming in that practiced Southern way, complimenting the china, laughing at my father's mild jokes. My mother sat at the head of the table, orchestrating the conversation like a conductor, ensuring the music never strayed from her chosen melody. So, Olivia, she began, slicing into her steak with delicate precision. How's your business going? Still doing those unconventional weddings, still helping couples find their own style, I said lightly. I just finished one in Lake Como last month. Intimate, only 20 guests, but absolutely beautiful. She smiled without warmth. Well, some people prefer small things, I suppose. But for Grace's wedding, we want something memorable. Grace flushed and laughed softly, twisting her napkin in her lap. Mom's been planning since the proposal. I raised my glass. To Grace and Daniel, may your day be everything you want it to be. Grace smiled gratefully. My mother looked satisfied. My father, as always, said little. He was gentle, kind, but allergic to conflict. He'd spent his entire marriage mediating between my mother's perfectionism and my attempts to breathe. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, my mother leaned close enough for me to catch her perfume roses and something colder beneath. Try not to post anything that weekend, dear. We don't want confusion online. You know how people talk. It was the final touch of condescension gift-wrapped as concern. Later that night, I sat on my apartment balcony in Seattle's city lights, shimmering on the water. My phone buzzed. Ethan's name lit the screen. "Hey, love," he said, his voice warm with that soft Italian lilt that always made me exhale. "How's home?" I laughed dryly. Toxic as ever. My mom officially uninvited me from Grace's wedding. A pause, then a low whistle. She really said that she said I'd ruin it. Apparently, authenticity doesn't photograph well next to her ivory tablecloths. Ethan chuckled, though I could hear the edge of anger beneath it. You plan dream weddings for a living. If anyone knows how to make something perfect, it's you. Perfection's subjective, I said quietly. He told me about his next project, a fashion campaign in Milan. They asked if I could bring my own creative director. I told them I might know someone brilliant. I smiled despite myself. You're serious? Come for a month. We'll work, eat pasta, talk about love without anyone judging us. The idea lodged in my mind like a spark waiting for oxygen. When we hung up, I stared out at the skyline. My mother's text popped up again, glowing on the screen like a bruise. Please remember no posts that weekend. I turned the phone face down. For years I'd played by the family's unspoken rules. Stay quiet, don't overshadow, be smaller. But something inside me was done shrinking. At midnight, I opened my laptop. Flights to Milan, one way. October 3rd. I hesitated for only a second before clicking book. The confirmation email arrived with a soft chime, and for the first time in months I felt a rush of air in my lungs. As the city hummed outside, I whispered into the dark. If I can't be part of their perfect day, maybe I'll create my own. The thought wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was freedom disguised as a quiet act of understanding. But deep down I knew it would shock them all the same. The air in Milan smelled like roasted coffee and rain when I stepped off the plane. Warm sunlight filtered through the glass roof of Malpensa Airport, catching the tiny particles of dust that shimmered like glitter in the air. I hadn't slept much, but the exhaustion felt different, hopeful instead of heavy. Ethan was waiting for me at arrivals, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, a small smile curving the corner of his mouth. Welcome to Italy, he said, pulling me into his arms. His scent leather espresso, a hint of cedar, felt like safety. For the first time in weeks, my body relaxed completely. I still can't believe I'm here, I whispered. Believe it, he said. You're not running away. You're running towards something. That first morning in Milan felt like a rebirth. The cab ride to Ethan's loft took us through narrow streets lined with faded buildings and wrought iron balconies covered in flowers. The city hummed with life, church bells, scooters, laughter, spilling from cafe doors. I watched everything pass by like I was seeing color for the first time. Ethan's apartment was tucked inside an old stone building with arched windows and high ceilings. Sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling glass panes, casting golden reflections on the white walls. He made espresso while I stood at the window staring at the rooftops painted with morning light. For years, I said softly, I planned other people's happiness. But mine always felt postponed. Ethan placed a cup in front of me. Then let's stop postponing. He was here for a fashion campaign with a small Italian brand known for romantic minimalism. They had asked him to create a visual story called Love Over Obligation. When he told them he wanted me to art direct it, they'd said yes instantly. It was supposed to be just a work project, but something about the title made my heart ache. We spent the next few days scouting locations around the city. Old villas framed by ivy cobblestone courtyards, golden fields outside the city. I carried my camera everywhere, capturing details that made my heart hum the way afternoon light hit a cathedral's marble columns, or how a couple shared a secret smile by the fountain in Piazza del Duomo. Each photograph felt like therapy. One morning, as we wandered through Brera's narrow alleys, Ethan looked at me and said, "You look like someone remembering how to breathe." "I think I am," I said. He smiled. "Good. That's what art should do." That night, after a long day of shooting, we sat on the balcony with a bottle of red wine. The city stretched below us, glowing with thousands of soft lights. Cars hummed faintly in the distance, and the sky was a deep, endless blue. Ethan leaned back in his chair, glass in hand. "Do you ever think about going home?" "Home feels complicated," I said. "They've built a version of me there I don't recognize. The troublemaker, the one who ruins things. He was quiet for a moment. You know that's not you. I know, I said. But they don't. He reached across the table and took my hand. Then maybe it's time you create your own story. The way he said it planted a seed inside me, a thought that would grow roots in the days ahead. The next afternoon, we met with a designer named Livia Moretti in her tiny studio, filled with bolts of fabric and vintage photographs. She was petite, energetic, and had the kind of warmth that made people open up instantly. I watched your work, she told me in melodic English. You understand emotion, not just composition. That's rare. I smiled a little embarrassed. I just try to capture what feels real. Livia nodded. Real is always beautiful, even when it hurts. Her words stayed with me long after we left the studio. Real is always beautiful. As the days passed, the project took shape quickly. Ethan's camera adored Milan. The old textures, the soft light, the quiet grandeur of a city that didn't need to try too hard. We shot early in the mornings when the streets were empty, using couples we found by chance, two lovers sitting on church steps, a grandmother holding her husband's arm while crossing the street. Every image felt unposed, alive. One afternoon, while we were reviewing footage in a cafe, Ethan leaned back and said casually, You know we should do something like this for ourselves. I laughed. What do you mean? He grinned. An editorial shoot? Except it's not fake. A wedding. Ours. I froze for a second, coffee cup midair. You're serious completely. You plan weddings for everyone else. Maybe it's time you plan one that actually belongs to you. I tried to play it off with humor, but my pulse fluttered. You do realize that my family would call that the ultimate betrayal, right? He shrugged. Or maybe it's the ultimate freedom. I didn't answer. I just stared at the window, watching the reflection of golden sunlight bouncing off the glass. For years, I had been told what I could and couldn't do, who I could and couldn't be. What if this was my chance to stop asking permission? That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea haunted me in the best possible way. I lay in bed listening to the rain tapping gently against the balcony doors, imagining what it would feel like to say vows without judgment, to belong entirely to a moment of my own making. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Grace is finalizing her seating chart. Please don't post anything that weekend. Let's avoid unnecessary confusion. Unnecessary confusion. That's what my existence had become, a potential disturbance in her perfect picture. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Ethan found me sitting by the window. You okay? I handed him the phone. He read the text, then looked at me. She still wants to control how your life looks. I nodded, voice low. It's like I've spent my entire life apologizing for taking up space. Then stop apologizing, he said simply. Create something so honest it can't be compared to anyone else's version. Later that day, we took a train north toward Lake Como to scout another location. Outside the window, rolling hills gave way to shimmering water. The sunlight flickered like gold dust on the lake's surface. Ethan leaned close. If we did it, he whispered, if we really had our own ceremony, where would you want it? I looked out the window, the reflection of my face overlapping the blue of the sky. Somewhere quiet, I said. Somewhere I don't have to ask to be seen, he smiled softly. Then Italy is perfect. We fell silent, both lost in thought. I could almost see it, an Olive Garden candlelight, the sound of laughter without judgment. A wedding that wasn't about pleasing anyone. When we returned to Milan, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank page in my planner. Slowly, almost without realizing it, I wrote the words, Our Day, at the top. Below it, I began sketching ideas: a terrace overlooking the water, a small guest list, olive branches instead of roses. It felt both rebellious and pure. Later that night, as we sat watching the city lights flicker across the rooftops, Ethan said, You're thinking about it, aren't you? I laughed softly. I am, and that scares me. He tilted his head. Maybe that's how you know it's right. The moon rose above the skyline, pale and full. I watched its reflection shimmer in my wine glass and felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve I couldn't ignore anymore. For the first time in years, my life didn't feel like a reaction, it felt like a creation. Before going to bed, I texted my mother back. "Thanks for the reminder, I'll keep that weekend quiet." Then I turned off my phone, looked at Ethan, and said, "Maybe it's time I planned a wedding I'd actually want to attend." He smiled slow and sure. "Then let's make it unforgettable." Outside, Milan slept beneath a sky full of stars, and I felt something open inside me, a calm rebellion, the beginning of a promise. This time, I wasn't running from the family that excluded me. I was running toward the version of myself they'd never let exist. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the loft, painting the walls in soft gold. I sat at the kitchen counter with my planner open, a pen hovering over a blank page. For years, my life had been built around other people's dreams, color palettes, seating charts, floral arrangements that had nothing to do with me. But that morning in Milan, with the smell of coffee and fresh bread in the air, I realized I wanted to design something that belonged entirely to me. Ethan walked in hair messy from sleep, wearing that lopsided grin that always made my heart stutter. "You're awake early," he said, reaching for the espresso machine. "What are you plotting?" I turned the planner toward him. He leaned closer, reading the words I'd scribbled across the top of the page, "Our wedding." He blinked, then laughed. "You're serious," I smiled. Half serious, half terrified. He set the cup down beside me and kissed the top of my head. That's how the best plans start. We spent the rest of the morning talking, the conversation tumbling between fantasy and logistics. At first it felt like a creative exercise, something fun to imagine. But the more we talked, the more real it became. I could already see it in my head: sunlight over an olive grove, a terrace overlooking a lake, laughter from people who actually cared to be there. No performance, no perfection, just truth. A few days later, we started scouting. Italy seemed made for love stories, and every place we visited felt like it had been waiting for us. There was a grand villa in Lake Garda wrapped in vines and history, but it felt too polished, too curated. Then we saw a monastery hidden in the hills of Tuscany, its walls covered in faded murals. The silence there was breathtaking, but it felt too solemn for the kind of joy we wanted. It wasn't until we met Marco De Luca, one of Ethan's photographer friends, that we found the place. Marco lived near Lake Maggiore, in a small villa passed down through his family. When we arrived, the afternoon light bathed everything in gold, the kind of light photographers chase their whole lives. Olive trees lined the gravel path, and the lake glittered in the distance like liquid silver. "This place," I whispered, turning in a slow circle. Marco smiled. "It has seen many kinds of love, messy, quiet, forbidden, true. You'll fit right in." Ethan looked at me, eyebrows raised. "So Mrs. Cole to be, what do you think?" I laughed. "I think it's perfect." That evening we sat with Marco on the terrace, drinking wine that tasted like sunlight. Cicadas sang in the distance. I watched the horizon fade from orange to pink to indigo and felt something settle inside me, a calm I hadn't felt in years. "This doesn't feel like revenge," I said quietly. "It feels like coming home to myself." Ethan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then we're doing it right." The following weeks blurred into color, laughter, and quiet purpose. Livia Moretti joined us from Milan, bringing swatches of ivory silk and lace. We spent an entire afternoon in her studio while she draped fabric over my shoulders, muttering in Italian about texture and light. When she pinned the last fold, I turned to the mirror and gasped. The dress was simple, no jewels, no layers, no unnecessary grandeur, just a soft silhouette that moved when I breathed. "I look like me," I whispered. Livia smiled, her eyes shining. "Exactly, you finally do." When we returned to the villa, we began planning the ceremony itself. No stages, no guests out of obligation. Only a handful of people we trusted, Marco, Livia, and 2 close friends from Los Angeles who happened to be in Europe. The rest would be nature, olive branches, candles, the lake as witness. Each detail we planned felt like rewriting a story that had once been stolen from me. My mother had always told me that weddings were about reputation, that beauty was measured in cost, not meaning. Every decision she'd ever made was about keeping appearances spotless. But I wanted imperfection. I wanted laughter caught mid-breath, petals falling too soon, light shifting unexpectedly. I wanted life, not performance. Ethan filmed parts of our preparation with his vintage Super 8 camera, saying he wanted it to feel like a memory instead of a documentary. He caught me barefoot arranging olive leaves into a bouquet, my hair falling loose around my face. In one clip, I turned toward him and laughed, sunlight spilling through my hands. Watching the playback later, I barely recognized the woman in the frame. She looked free. A week before the wedding, my phone rang. My mother's name lit the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Olivia," she said, her voice clipped, already rehearsed. "Are you still in Italy?" "I am." "I hope you're not planning anything foolish. Grace's wedding is next week, and the last thing we need is confusion on social media." "Don't worry, Mom," I said, smiling into the quiet that followed. "I understand." That phrase had once been a shield away to keep her from seeing how much she hurt me. But this time it tasted different, not surrender, clarity. After I hung up, Ethan found me standing on the balcony staring out at the lake. "Everything okay?" "She just wanted to remind me not to ruin Grace's perfect day," I said softly. He frowned. "You're not ruining anything." "I know." I turned toward him. "That's what she'll never understand." That night, I sat by the window while Ethan edited footage on his laptop. I thought about my sister, about how we'd shared everything growing up until the world decided she was golden and I was too much. I wondered if she'd ever question why our mother had turned love into competition. Ethan broke the silence. "Do you ever think she'll come around, Grace?" I asked. He nodded. "Maybe someday," I said, "but it doesn't change what I need now." He closed the laptop, moved beside me, and handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Early wedding gift," he said. Inside was a vintage Leica film camera, the leather worn smooth by years of use. On the bottom he'd engraved tiny words, "For every moment they never saw in you." My throat tightened. "It's beautiful." "So are you," he said simply. We stayed like that for a long time, the sound of water lapping the shore below. I thought about everything that had brought me here. Every dismissal, every cold glance, every time I'd been told to be quieter, smaller, easier to love. And somehow all of it led to this, the moment before my own story truly began. Before going to bed, I opened my planner again and checked the final page. Location: Villa, De Luca, Lake Maggiore. Date: October 12. Guess 7. Weather forecast. Clear skies, golden light. I added one last line beneath it. For the girl they said ruined everything, and finally made something beautiful instead. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. Ready? I looked down at the list and smiled. More than ever. Outside, the lake shimmered under the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang soft and steady. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was rebelling. I felt like I was returning to myself, to love, to the life that had always been waiting. And as I closed my planner, I whispered into the quiet, "Let them have their perfect day. Mine will be real." The morning sun slid through the shutters, warm and golden, the kind of light that made everything seem softer than it was. I woke to the smell of espresso and the distant sound of church bells echoing over the lake. For a moment, everything felt untouched, perfectly still, suspended in peace. Ethan was already on the terrace, his camera in hand, capturing the light as it bounced off the olive trees. "You look peaceful," he said when I joined him. "I am," I said, leaning on the railing beside him. "I think I finally learned how to breathe again." He smiled. "Don't lose that." I wanted to promise I wouldn't, but peace I was learning was always temporary. Later that morning, while Ethan was editing photos, I checked my email. The first message stopped me cold. "Heard a rumor you're planning a wedding abroad? Is it true? It was from an old client in Charleston, someone who still had lunch with my mother's friends. My stomach dropped. There was no way they could know unless someone had seen the paperwork for our villa booking or the local permits Marco had helped us file. I stared at the message for a long time, my pulse steady but sharp like a warning. The secret I'd kept so carefully was slipping through invisible cracks. I closed the laptop and tried to shake it off. We had a day full of preparations, flowers to select, camera angles to test, a dinner menu to finalize. Still, the unease followed me like a shadow. In Charleston, my mother was probably arranging table settings or dictating the floral arch design for Grace's ceremony. Every detail of that wedding had been curated to perfection, down to the scent of the candles and the playlist for the dinner reception. The very idea of chaos of imperfection was her personal nightmare. And yet, half a world away, I was building something wild and uncontainable. By early afternoon, we were knee-deep in olive branches, working with a local florist named Sophia, who hummed quietly as she arranged the stems. The air smelled of rosemary and lake water. I almost forgot about the email until my phone rang. Grace. I froze, staring at her name. We rarely called each other anymore. Our conversations had been reduced to polite text messages and family updates through our father. My thumb hovered over the screen before I finally swiped to answer. Hey, I said, keeping my tone light. There was a long pause before her voice came through, quieter than I expected. Are you getting married, Liv? My heart skipped. Where did you hear that? Mom's friend Carol told her, Grace said. Apparently, someone at the Italian consulate saw your name on a marriage license. Mom is, she sighed. She's losing her mind. I sat down on the stone step outside the villa, pressing a hand to my forehead. The sky above was cloudless, painfully blue. It's not what she thinks, I said carefully. So you're not? I hesitated, and that silence told her everything. Oh my God, Grace said softly. You're really doing it. It's not about you or Mom, I said quickly. It's for me. For us. Us, she repeated. As in you and Ethan. The same weekend as my wedding, her voice cracked on the last word and guilt flashed through me like lightning. The villa dates were limited, I explained. We didn't pick it to hurt anyone. It just fit. Grace let out a long breath. Mom thinks it's deliberate. She says you're trying to embarrass us. I laughed bitterly. Everything I do embarrasses her. That's not true, isn't it? I asked. When I got that photography scholarship, she told people I was too focused on myself. When I moved to Seattle, she said I was abandoning the family. When I built my business, she said I was wasting my time. I could cure cancer, Grace, and she'd still say my shoes were inappropriate. There was silence on the line except for the faint sound of traffic on her end. Maybe she's wrong, Grace said finally. Maybe she's hard on you, hard on everyone. But you know she loves us in her way. I swallowed the ache in my throat. Her way is suffocating. I just don't want this to turn into something worse, Grace said, her voice trembling now. You're my sister, Liv. I love you. I wish you could be here. I wish we could have had both. Her words hung between us, heavy and fragile. I closed my eyes, remembering the girl she used to be, the one who shared secrets under the covers, who defended me when I got grounded, who used to slip notes under my door that said, I love you anyway. I wish that too, I said. Before either of us could say more, the call dropped. I sat there for a while, listening to the soft hum of the wind through the olive trees. When I looked up, Ethan was standing in the doorway watching me quietly. Grace? He asked. I nodded. She knows. He walked over and crouched down beside me. You okay? I don't know, I said honestly. It feels like the closer I get to peace, the louder the world gets. He brushed a strand of hair from my face. Then let them be loud. We'll be quiet. That night a storm rolled in from the mountains. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters, the scent of rain heavy in the air. We moved the candles inside and ate dinner by the fireplace. The storm was wild, beautiful thunder cracking over the lake, lightning slicing through the dark. It feels like home followed me here, I said. Ethan poured more wine into my glass, then let it watch. Let it see what peace looks like when it doesn't belong to them. I smiled, feeling the tension in my chest loosen a little. You make it sound so easy. It's not easy, he said. It's just worth it. After he fell asleep, I stayed up watching the rain lash against the glass. My phone buzzed again, messages from Charleston flooding in. Your mom is furious. People are talking about you. I heard you're doing this to make a point. Maybe I was, but not the point they thought. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them. I was trying to prove something to myself, that I didn't have to disappear to keep the peace. That I could exist loudly, beautifully, without permission. By morning, the storm had passed. The air was clean and sweet, the sky washed in soft blue. I stepped outside barefoot, the grass still damp, the lake calm again. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Sleep okay? He asked. Not really, I said. But I feel lighter. Good, he said. Because today we start filming. Filming, he grinned. Marco wants to document everything. He says if people can turn pain into movies, we can turn love into art. I laughed, leaning back against him. Let's just hope no one back home sees it before we're ready. He kissed the side of my neck. Even if they do, what's the worst that happens? They get angry. They already are, he said softly. The truth of it made me laugh. I turned in his arms, pressing my forehead to his. Then let's give them something beautiful to be angry about. As the sun climbed higher, we stood there for a long time, the lake shimmering before us. For the first time, I didn't feel like a runaway or a disappointment. I felt like someone rewriting her own story, one word, one choice, one breath at a time. And somewhere across the ocean, I imagined my mother's voice breaking through her own storm, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. The answer was simple. I was finally doing something for me. The call came just after sunrise. The air was still heavy with the scent of rain, the villa wrapped in the quiet calm that follows a storm. I was pouring coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. One glance at the screen, Mom, and my pulse tightened. I hesitated, knowing this was inevitable. Then I answered, Olivia. Her voice was sharp, brittle, like a string pulled too tight. Tell me it's not true. I closed my eyes. What's not true? Don't play stupid with me. Tell me you're not getting married in Italy the same weekend as your sister. The spoon clinked against the cup as I set it down. Outside, the lake shimmered quiet and innocent, as if mocking the chaos waiting across the ocean. It's true, I said softly. A breath hissed through the line. Do you realize what you're doing to this family? To your sister, I leaned against the counter, gripping its edge. I'm marrying the man I love. I didn't realize that was a crime. Don't you dare twist this, she snapped. You're making a spectacle. You know exactly how this will look. You mean how you think it'll look. Everything you do reflects on us, she said, her voice climbing. People will think we raised you to be selfish. I laughed quietly, the sound bitter. You didn't raise me to be selfish, Mom. You raised me to be invisible. For a second, silence. Then she spoke again, colder now. You've always had to make everything about yourself, haven't you? I'm not the one who decided that, I said. You did. On the other end, I heard her pacing, the familiar rhythm of her heels on hardwood. I pictured her in the Charleston kitchen's sunlight, bouncing off those marble counters she loved more than people. This is going to ruin Grace's day, she said finally. I stared at the sunlight spilling across the villa floor. Grace's day will be perfect because that's what you'll make sure of. You always do. Her voice faltered. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've spent your entire life making sure she shines, even if it meant dimming everyone else. Stop exaggerating. You've always been dramatic, Olivia. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest. Do you hate me that much? She asked suddenly. The question hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened, but my voice stayed calm. No, Mom, I don't hate you. I just finally love myself enough not to need your approval. There was a long pause, then the sound of her breath breaking. You think you've won something, don't you? This isn't about winning, I said. It's about peace. You're delusional. And you're scared, I said quietly. Because you can't control me anymore. Her silence stretched brittle as glass. I thought I heard her inhale sharply, but then the line went dead. For a few seconds I just stood there staring at the phone. The air around me felt charged, vibrating with something between sadness and relief. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from a shower. That sounded intense, he said gently. It was. I exhaled slowly. But I think I finally said what I needed to. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me from behind. You okay? I don't know, I admitted. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like breaking. He kissed my temple. Maybe that's what healing is supposed to feel like first. We stood in silence, the only sound the faint clinking of wind chimes outside. My hands were shaking slightly. I hadn't realized how heavy those words had been until I finally let them go. Later that morning, I sat by the fireplace with my journal. I wrote down every sentence I could remember from the call, not because I wanted to relive it, but because I wanted to release it. The ink bled slightly on the page as if the paper itself was tired of holding pain. When I finished, I tore the page out, folded it neatly, and slid it into the flames. The fire caught fast, curling the paper inward, the words vanishing into ash. Watching it burn, I whispered to myself, I'm done asking for permission. That night, the sky over Lake Maggiore turned silver with moonlight. Ethan and I ate dinner outside on the terrace, the quiet broken only by the chirping of crickets. You know, he said, refilling my glass, I think you did something braver than you realize. Standing up to her, I asked. Standing up for yourself. I smiled faintly. It's strange. I've been angry at her for years, but now I just feel tired. That's because anger takes energy. Peace doesn't. I nodded, letting his words sink in. After dinner, he disappeared for a moment and returned with something small in his hands, a piece of folded parchment, the edges slightly singed. I found this by the fireplace, he said. Should I ask? I shook my head. Just an old list. What kind of list? The kind where I tried to fit myself into other people's expectations. He studied me for a moment. You're writing a new one now, aren't you? Yeah, I said quietly. But this one's just for me. He smiled. Good. The next morning, the sky was painted pink and gold. I walked outside barefoot dew clinging to my feet. The air was crisp clean. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel like I was living inside someone else's story. Then my phone buzzed again. Grace this time. Her name filled the screen like a ghost I wasn't ready to face. Hey, I answered. Her voice was small. Mom's furious. She says you humiliated her. I laughed softly. That didn't take much. She's saying terrible things, Liv. I don't even know what to say to her anymore. She'll calm down. I'm not sure she will, Grace said. But I understand why you're doing this. Maybe I'd have done the same if I were you. Her honesty stunned me. For the first time in years, her voice sounded less like competition and more like kinship. Thank you, I said quietly. She hesitated. I just want you to be happy. I am, I said, meaning it. For the first time, I really am. After we hung up, I walked back to the terrace. The morning light spilled across the lake, turning everything to gold. Ethan stood by the railing, filming the ripples of water. He turned to me, his smile gentle. How's your heart lighter? I said. Good, he murmured. You finally made space for joy. I joined him, resting my head on his shoulder. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, full of possibility. In the afternoon, I went into my studio and opened a small wooden box where I kept old notes and reminders from my career guest lists, fabric sample sketches of other people's perfect days. I sifted through them one by one and then set them aside, leaving only a blank notebook on the table. On the first page, I wrote, "A wedding should never be about approval. It should be about truth." I didn't know yet that those words would echo far beyond this villa, far beyond my family's world of appearances. For now, they were mine alone, a promise whispered into quiet air. That night, as the stars blinked above the lake, Ethan came to bed and kissed the back of my hand. "Are you sure you still want to do it?" he asked softly. "After everything with your family," I turned to face him. "I've never been more sure of anything." He nodded, brushing his thumb across my cheek. "Then let's make it beautiful." I smiled. "We already have." When he fell asleep, I slipped out of bed and stood at the window. The moonlight reflected on the lake like silver glass, and for the first time in my life, I felt untethered, not lost free. The next day, I'd start finalizing the guest list, arranging flowers, setting the stage for a ceremony that would quietly rewrite everything I'd ever been told about who I was allowed to be. But in that moment, I simply stood there breathing, listening to the stillness, feeling every cell in my body finally stop apologizing for existing. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the storm was over. But the real story, the one that belonged to me, was just beginning. The morning air smelled of rain, and rosemary soft and clean after the storm that had rolled through the night. I woke before Ethan, the room still dim, the sound of waves brushing against the rocks below the villa. For a long time, I just lay there watching the faint outline of light sneak through the shutters, feeling something I hadn't felt in years' anticipation, without fear. By the time Ethan stirred, the house was already buzzing with quiet activity. Livia had arrived early, with the florist, her voice floating through the courtyard as she directed where to hang the olive garlands. Marco was setting up his camera on the terrace, muttering about angles and morning light. The wedding was only a day away, and everything felt beautifully unreal. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist as I stood at the window. "You're thinking too much," he whispered. "I'm trying not to," I said, smiling. "It's harder than it looks." He kissed the side of my neck. "You've planned hundreds of weddings. Tomorrow is just one more." I turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. "No," I said softly. "It's the first one that's mine." He smiled, that quiet, grounding smile that had steadied me through every storm. "Then let's make it beautiful." We spent the rest of the morning preparing. The florist's assistants wove jasmine through the stone archway, while I arranged candles and brass holders we'd found at a flea market in Milan. Every choice felt intentional, simple, unpolished, real. There were no elaborate centerpieces, no seating charts, no performances. Just us, our closest friends, and the lake as our witness. As the sun climbed higher, Marco tested his lenses, capturing shots of the terrace. "The light here," he said, looking through the viewfinder, "it's like it forgives everything it touches." I laughed, then pointed at me. He did, snapping a photo as I stood barefoot among the olive branches, my hair tied loosely at the nape of my neck. When I saw the image later, I barely recognized myself. There was no trace of the woman who had always tried too hard to fit into someone else's version of perfect. That afternoon, Grace called. My phone buzzed where it sat on the edge of the table, her name flashing across the screen. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring, but something in me knew it was time. "Hey," I said quietly. She didn't bother with small talk. "Mom's still upset," she said, her tone clipped but tired. "She's been calling people all morning, trying to get sympathy. She says you're doing this to humiliate her." "I'm not," I said simply. "I'm doing this because it's the first time I've been happy in years." Grace sighed. "You know she won't see it that way." "I don't expect her to." There was a pause. "Liv," she said softly, "she's scared. She doesn't know how to be proud of you without feeling like it's a loss for her." The honesty in her voice made my chest ache. "I know," I said, "but I can't keep shrinking to make her comfortable. She won't understand that. She doesn't have to." Grace was silent for a while, then said, "I hope it's worth it. It already is." After we hung up, I stood at the edge of the terrace, staring at the horizon, until the ache in my chest turned to calm. The air smelled of salt and flowers. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "This time I'm not running from guilt. I'm walking toward peace." Ethan joined me a few minutes later, slipping his hand into mine. "Grace?" he asked. I nodded. "She's caught in the middle like always." He squeezed my hand gently. "You can love people and still choose yourself." I'm learning that I said, finally. By late afternoon, the preparations were finished. The villa looked like a dream, wild, imperfect, alive. Livia had transformed the archway into something that looked more like nature than design olive leaves and white jasmine spilling over the stone like they'd grown there for centuries. We sat down for dinner with Marco and his wife, the table lit by candles and laughter. The wine tasted like summer. The kind of warmth that sits in your chest long after you've swallowed it. To tomorrow, Marco toasted, raising his glass. To love without apology. To peace, I added. Ethan met my eyes and smiled. To finally being seen. The clinking of glasses echoed softly through the terrace. For a few blissful hours, the world outside that villa didn't exist. After everyone went to bed, I wandered back outside alone. The lake shimmered beneath the moonlight, the water still from the lack of wind. I thought about my mother, probably awake back in Charleston, replaying everything in her head like it was a crime scene. I thought about Grace torn between loyalty and love. And I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who always tried to fix what she didn't break. The truth was, I didn't want revenge anymore. I just wanted to stop asking for permission to be happy. Ethan came out a few minutes later, barefoot, his hair mussed from sleep. You. Okay. Just thinking. He walked up behind me, wrapping me in his arms. You don't owe anyone an explanation, Liv. I know, I said, but I wish they knew it too. He rested his chin on my shoulder. Tomorrow the world can keep its noise. We'll make our own kind of quiet. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of waves against the rocks. I leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my spine. I used to think love was about being chosen, I said. But now I think it's about choosing. Every day. Even when it's hard. He smiled against my skin. Then, let's keep choosing. We stood there for a long time, saying nothing, just listening to the night breathe. Somewhere across the ocean, the final details of my sister's perfect wedding were being set in place. 2 worlds, 2 brides, 2 versions of what love looked like. But for the first time, I didn't feel left out of hers. I felt grounded in mine. Before we went to bed, I blew out the last of the candles on the terrace. Their smoke curled upward, fading into the dark sky. Tomorrow would be our day. Not a spectacle. Not revenge. Just love. Simple, honest, and ours. The morning of the weddings arrived, wrapped in quiet light and a strange calm that settled deep in my chest. The villa was hushed, except for the low hum of cicadas and the sound of Marco's footsteps moving across the terrace outside. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, turning the whole room gold. Ethan was sitting at the edge of the bed, his camera on the nightstand. He turned when I stirred. "Happy wedding day," he said, voice soft, the corners of his mouth lifting in that way that always made my heart ache. For a moment I didn't move. I just breathed, letting the morning wrap around me. "It doesn't feel real," I whispered. "It's as real as we make it," he said, standing to draw back the curtains. The lake outside shimmered like glass, and the olive trees were bathed in early light. And today, we make it beautiful. We had breakfast together, on the balcony, croissants, still warm, fresh fruit, black coffee. The kind of meal that doesn't feel grand, but somehow feels perfect. There were no bridesmaids, no hairstylists, no planners bustling about, just us and the friends who had chosen to be here. By mid-morning, the villa began to hum with quiet activity. Livia arrived carrying the dress, her eyes shining. "Bellissima," she whispered as she held it up against the light. It looked softer than I remembered, almost glowing in the sunday. She helped me into it, her hands gentle and sure. The fabric slid against my skin like water. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back, not because I looked different, but because I finally looked like myself. Livia clasped her hands together. "You see, you were never too much. You were just never allowed to shine." Her words lodged deep in my heart. Outside, Marco and Ethan were setting up the cameras, laughing like brothers. Every so often, Ethan would look up toward the window and smile, and my heart would lift all over again. By noon, the terrace had been transformed. Olive branches and wild jasmine trailed across the old stone archway. Lanterns hung from the vines, swaying gently in the warm breeze. The air smelled of lemon and rosemary. Marco came to get me just before the ceremony. "The light is perfect," he said. "Are you ready?" I nodded, my hands steady. Yes, finally. As I stepped out onto the terrace, the world seemed to pause. The lake stretched endlessly ahead, sunlight glinting off the water. Ethan stood beneath the archway, his suit simple, his eyes bright. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of insects, the soft click of a camera shutter, felt magnified. When I reached him, Ethan took my hands, his fingers warm and steady. "You look like peace," he said. "And you look like home," I whispered back. The ceremony was brief, but it felt infinite. Marco's wife read a poem about choosing love over fear, her accent rolling like music. When it came time for our vows, my voice trembled at first, but steadied as I spoke. "I grew up believing love meant shrinking yourself," I said. "But you taught me it can mean expansion. It can mean truth. Today I promise never to hide again." Ethan's jaw flexed as he fought emotion. "You once told me you felt invisible," he said. "From this day forward, I will spend every day making sure you're seen." When we kissed, the villa erupted in applause. For a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The family, the tension, the miles between us and Charleston. There was only the light, the warmth, and the sound of our laughter carried by the wind. Later, during the small dinner under the lanterns, the golden hour poured over everything like honey. Marco's children ran through the grass with sparklers, their laughter echoing off the water. Livia leaned over and said, "This is the kind of joy you can't fake. It's in the air." I smiled. "That's because it's real." We toasted with local wine and simple words. To love, to freedom, to finally being enough. As the night deepened, Ethan projected a short film he'd made, clips from our time in Italy. The laughter in cafes, the train rides, the storm that had nearly torn through our plans. The final shot was me standing on the terrace at sunrise, camera in hand, the words, "Love over obligation," fading onto the screen. Everyone clapped. I couldn't stop smiling. When the last lantern dimmed and our friends drifted off to their rooms, Ethan and I stayed behind on the terrace. The air was cool, the stars bright over the water. "You did it," he said quietly. "You changed your story." I leaned my head against his shoulder. I didn't realize how heavy it was until I let it go. He turned toward me, eyes searching. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I thought about my mother, about Grace walking down an aisle half a world away. Maybe not, but understanding was never the goal. "Then what was peace?" I said simply. And I found it. We sat in silence, the only sound the faint lapping of water against stone. In that stillness, I could almost imagine the echo of Grace's laughter somewhere across the ocean. Another celebration unfolding under a different sky. 2 weddings, 2 sisters, 2 kinds of love. Inside, the old clock in the hall began to chime midnight. Ethan looked at me, eyes soft. "Happy wedding day, Mrs. Cole." I smiled. "Happy Freedom Day, Mr. Cole." We stayed outside until the candles burned down to pools of wax. The night felt endless, eternal. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. When I finally lay in bed, exhaustion hit like a wave, but it was the good kind, the kind that comes after release. I closed my eyes, listening to Ethan's slow, even breathing beside me, the rhythm of the lake beyond. Tomorrow I knew the world would find out. Tomorrow there would be questions, calls, outrage, and chaos. But tonight, all of that was far away. Tonight there was only the quiet truth. For once I wasn't the one ruining someone else's perfect day. I had created my own. The morning after the wedding felt like waking inside a dream. The villa was wrapped in silence, the kind that hums with leftover laughter. My head was still full of last night's light, The smell of olive branches, the taste of wine, the way Ethan's hand fit around mine when we danced under the lanterns. He was still asleep beside me, the sheet half tangled around his waist, his breathing slow. Outside the lake shimmered in soft silver light. For the first time in years my mind was quiet. I thought this was peace. I had no idea it was only the eye of the storm. I made coffee, stepped onto the balcony, and opened my phone. At first it was innocent, a few texts from friends congratulating us, a message from Marco with a handful of photos attached. I scrolled through them, smiling at the sight of myself walking toward Ethan through golden light, the lake behind me glowing like a mirror. Ethan joined me, still half asleep. "You're already up, I couldn't help it," I said, showing him the photos. "They're perfect," he grinned. "We should share a few. Let people see what real joy looks like." "Just a few," I said, hesitating. "Something small, no announcements, just gratitude." He nodded, kissed the top of my head, and uploaded them to my account. 5 photos, no captions, just hashtags, number authentic wedding, number love over obligation, number Italy. It felt harmless at the time. By noon, the notifications started buzzing non-stop. 1,000 likes, then 10,000. Comments pouring in from strangers. "This is the most beautiful wedding I've ever seen. Where is this villa?" The light, the intimacy, it's pure art. I refreshed the screen and froze. A wedding blog had reposted one of our photos with the headline, "American bride band from sister's wedding has her own in Italy." And it's stunning. My stomach dropped. "Ethan," I whispered, turning the screen toward him. He frowned. "How did they?" The article had screenshots of my earlier posts, the ones where I'd mentioned being excluded from my sister's big day. They'd pieced it all together, the timing, the hashtags, the story. "Oh no," I said softly. By evening it was everywhere. Wedding magazines, lifestyle pages, even travel blogs. The wedding that broke the internet, one headline read, "Choosing love over obligation, the sister who said, 'I do' to herself." Ethan tried to reassure me. "People will forget by tomorrow," but they didn't. By nightfall my follower count had doubled. The photos had been shared across platforms: Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, even TikTok. Strangers were analyzing the story, calling it empowerment revenge done right, a love letter to authenticity. Marco called just after sunset. "Sophia," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "The Italian Tourism Board just reposted your wedding photos. They want permission to use them in their campaign for destination weddings." What I asked, stunned. "They're saying it's the most romantic story they've seen all year." I looked out at the darkening lake, the sky streaked with orange and violet. My phone buzzed again and again, messages, comments, tags, the flood of a world suddenly watching. "What do we do?" I asked Ethan. He shrugged, though his eyes were wide. "We let them look. You didn't plan this, Liv. But maybe it's time the world saw who you really are." That night I couldn't sleep. My phone lit up beside the bed like a small, relentless fire. Every few seconds, another message, another share. A stranger from New Zealand wrote, "You reminded me it's okay to choose peace over approval." A woman from Texas, "I watched your vows and cried. I'm leaving my toxic family behind, too." It was overwhelming and beautiful, but I could feel the other side of it coming, the backlash, the voices from Charleston, the ones who'd call this betrayal. And they didn't make me wait long. The next morning my phone rang. "Grace." I hesitated, then answered. "Hey," her voice was tight. "Mom's furious. She's saying you planned this to humiliate her." I closed my eyes. "Grace, people are calling us non-stop," she continued. "Aunt Carol says the photos are on Facebook. There's a headline saying you stole the spotlight." "I didn't leak anything," I said. "We posted a few pictures, that's all." "You knew it was my wedding weekend." "I knew it was my life too," I said quietly. The line went silent for a moment. When Grace spoke again, her voice had softened. "It's just, Mom's unraveling. She thinks this was revenge." I swallowed hard. It wasn't. I just wanted my own peace. "But the same day, Liv," she whispered. "Of all the days in the year, There it was, the question I'd been dreading. The one that held both accusation and truth. I didn't answer right away. Outside, the villa glowed under morning light, calm, and still so far removed from the storm on the other side of the ocean. I picked the day because it was available, I said finally. Because it felt right. Maybe it was selfish. But I'm done living my life by other people's calendars. Grace exhaled shakily. Mom says you did it to hurt her. I laughed softly. She doesn't need my help for that. She's been hurting herself for years. Grace didn't respond, but I heard the faint sound of her sniffling. She's scared Liv. She says she's losing both of us. For the first time in a long while, I felt something almost like pity. Maybe she's just realizing we were never hers to control. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't angry or even triumphant. She just looked tired. Free, but tired. Ethan walked in holding his camera. "You okay?" I nodded. Grace called. "Mom's having a meltdown." He sighed. "You knew it would happen. I just didn't expect it to happen so fast." He kissed my forehead. The truth moves quickly once you stop hiding it. By that evening, our story had reached major news outlets. The Italian wedding heard around the world blared one headline. A journalist emailed me asking for an interview. Another wanted to feature the villa, calling it the birthplace of modern authenticity. Marco texted me a screenshot of his inbox. Dozens of inquiries from couples wanting to book the same location. "Your wedding just made me famous," he wrote. Ethan laughed when I showed him. You see, even the chaos has beauty. But beneath the laughter, I could feel the tension building. My mother's silence had always been louder than her words, and now that silence felt like a storm cloud hanging over the Atlantic. That night I scrolled through the comments again, unable to stop. Some were supportive, others cutting. She just wanted attention. Another influencer turning trauma into trend. Still, that light is unreal. I set the phone down and went outside. The air was cool, the sky heavy with stars. The lanterns from last night still hung from the vines, swaying gently. Ethan followed me out. "Can't sleep, I think I started something I can't control," I said. He slipped his arm around my shoulders. "Maybe you started something you were meant to." I looked at him, the light from the house catching the edges of his face. "Do you ever think the truth has its own timing?" "Always," he said. "And it looks like yours just arrived." I let his words settle in the night air. The sound of water against the stones was steady grounding. For the first time since the photos went live, I wasn't afraid. Tomorrow there would be interviews and headlines and maybe even more judgment. But there would also be light, the same golden light that had made the world stop and look for one single perfect moment. I smiled into the darkness. If they wanted a story, I guess I finally gave them one. Ethan's voice was soft beside me. "Yeah, but this one's yours." And as the wind rustled the olive branches, I realized something important. I hadn't ruined anyone's perfect day. I had simply stopped ruining mine. The headlines were waiting for me when I woke up. Ethan was already at the table, scrolling through his laptop, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked up as I entered, eyes flicking from the screen to me with that mixture of disbelief and awe we'd both been living in for the past 48 hours. "You're on the homepage of 3 magazines," he said, pushing the laptop toward me. "Vogue, The Atlantic, and some lifestyle site I've never heard of. They're calling you." He squinted at the screen. "The face of modern authenticity." I stared at the photo that filled the page. It was one Marco had taken right after the ceremony, the wind catching the veil sunlight, breaking through the clouds. I looked happy, radiantly so. It almost didn't look like me, and yet it was the first time I felt like it truly did. Ethan smiled. "You realize your wedding has officially become a cultural phenomenon," I laughed, softly shaking my head. "I planned something small, private, and quiet, and somehow it's the loudest thing I've ever done." He closed the laptop and kissed my hand. Maybe that's the point. For the next few days, the world refused to quiet down. Every morning brought a new headline, A new wave of messages, a new article dissecting my statement against perfection. The hashtags number love over obligation and number authentic bride were trending in 6 countries. People tagged me in posts about setting boundaries, reclaiming peace, and choosing joy over approval. Some of it felt surreal, almost absurd, like watching my private life projected on a movie screen I hadn't agreed to star in. And yet, there was something deeply comforting about seeing strangers defend me, understand me, see me. Still, the silence from Charleston was deafening. My mother didn't call. My father didn't write. Grace had texted only once since that last emotional phone call. Mom's not talking to anyone. Give her time. Give her time. Time to do what, decide whether I was still her daughter. I tried to focus on work. Ethan was fielding offers from magazines and producers who wanted interviews or collaborations. They want your story, he said one morning, flipping through his emails. Netflix, BBC, even some documentary filmmakers from New York. I shook my head. I'm not sure I want to tell it anymore. It's already been told for me. Then maybe that's exactly why you should, he said. If they're going to talk about you, at least make sure they're hearing your truth. He was right, and I hated that he was. That afternoon, while he took calls, I sat by the window overlooking Milan's rooftops. The city buzzed below horns, laughter, the faint scent of espresso drifting from the street cafes. I opened my messages and started scrolling. There were thousands. Messages from strangers all over the world. A woman from Ohio wrote, "I'm 58 and just ended a toxic marriage. Watching your wedding made me believe in second chances." A college student from Canada. "My mom never supported my career choice. Seeing you choose yourself gave me courage." A grandmother from Australia. "My daughters and I watched your story together. You reminded us that love doesn't need permission." I read until my eyes blurred. Each message felt like a quiet confession, a piece of someone else's life being handed to me for safekeeping. By the time Ethan returned, I was crying not from sadness, but something softer. "They get it," I whispered. "They really get it." He sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You started something, Liv. Maybe bigger than both of us." I wanted to believe that. But fame, even accidental fame, comes with its shadows. That evening, while scrolling through social media, I found the other comments. The ones whispered like poison between the praise. She did it for attention. Classic influencer move. Who gets married just to make a point? Another spoiled woman blaming her family for her choices. Each one stung in its own way. Small cuts, adding up to something raw. I closed the app and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman in the glass looked calm, almost serene, but inside I felt the ache of being misunderstood again, this time by strangers instead of family. Ethan found me there, silent. "Don't read the comments," he said softly. "I know," I said. "But part of me still wants to understand why people need to tear down something they don't even know." He touched my chin, gently turning my face toward him. "Because you did something they're afraid to do, which is live without asking permission." The next day, an email arrived from a woman named Jessica Ford, a producer from Los Angeles. She'd written a simple message: "Your story deserves your voice. Netflix wants to meet." No pressure, just a conversation. I read it 3 times. The idea of turning my chaos into something permanent, something filmed and dissected, made me uneasy. But part of me couldn't ignore the possibility that maybe telling my story could give it purpose. When I showed Ethan, he grinned. "Looks like the universe isn't done with us yet." I laughed, though the thought made me nervous. Hollywood isn't exactly where I pictured closure. "Maybe closure isn't a place," he said. "Maybe it's just being brave enough to look back without flinching." That night I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window watching the lights of the city flicker. Cars moved below like streams of fireflies. Somewhere out there, people were watching our video, reading our story, forming opinions about us. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Maybe for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval. My phone buzzed. A message from Grace. "Mom finally watched the video." She didn't say much, but she cried. My chest tightened. I typed back, "Is she okay?" After a minute, Grace replied, "She said you looked happy." She didn't sound angry, just quiet. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Quiet. For my mother's silence was never just silence. It was surrender. It was the closest thing she had to admitting she'd been wrong. I set the phone down and whispered to the night, "Thank you." Ethan stirred in bed, his voice sleepy. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said softly. "For once, I think it is." In the morning, I watched the sun rise over Milan, painting the city in soft pink. For years, I'd thought peace was something other people gave you an apology, forgiveness, understanding. But standing there, I realized peace was something you take back piece by piece until there's nothing left to prove. Later over coffee, Ethan asked, "So what do we do next?" I smiled. "We tell the story right." He raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean what I think it means?" "It means I'm ready to talk. But on my terms," he grinned, lifting his cup in a mock toast. "To your terms, Mrs. Cole?" I laughed, the sound feeling freer than it had in years. Outside, church bells chimed, marking a new hour, a new beginning. I thought about my family back in Charleston, about my mother tending her roses, Grace settling into her new marriage, my father hiding behind his quiet diplomacy. Maybe they'd never understand me. Maybe they didn't need to. All I knew was that I finally understood myself, and for the first time that was enough. The plane descended into Los Angeles beneath a sky that looked impossibly wide, streaked with streaks of pink and gold. From the window seat, I watched the city unfold, miles of rooftops, palm trees swaying in the afternoon light, the Pacific shimmering at the horizon like a promise. I pressed my hand to the glass and exhaled. "Funny," I said to Ethan, who sat beside me, earbuds in, reviewing footage from the villa. "I came here to talk about a wedding, and somehow it's become a movement." He grinned, glancing up. "Welcome to Hollywood, Mrs. Cole, where stories never stay small." The terminal buzzed with the familiar chaos of travelers' camera crews and blinking neon signs. As we walked toward the exit, I felt oddly calm. I'd spent most of my life dreading attention. Now, for the first time, I was walking straight into it. Jessica Ford, the Netflix producer, met us at the arrivals gate with a warm smile and a clipboard tucked under her arm. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed but kind. "Olivia, Ethan, thank you for coming," she said, shaking our hands. "You've caused quite the cultural stir." "Accidentally," I said. "The best stories usually are," she replied. Her car took us through the heart of Santa Monica, palm trees flashing past the windows. Billboards advertised movies, shows, lives larger than life. I couldn't help but think how strange it was that my own had joined them even for a moment. The Netflix building was sleek and impossibly bright. Inside, posters of famous documentaries lined the hallway. Jessica led us into a glass conference room overlooking the city. "We're not interested in sensationalizing," she began. "Your story isn't about scandal. It's about choosing love over obligation, and what that says about family identity and forgiveness." Her words landed softly but deeply. "I can agree to that," I said. "But if I do this, it has to be honest. No villains, no rewriting for drama." Jessica nodded. "You'll have full narrative input. This isn't about tearing anyone down, it's about showing people what healing looks like." Ethan reached for my hand under the table. His eyes said what his mouth didn't. "You're taking your story back." A week later, we began filming. The first scene was simple. Me sitting in a studio washed in morning light, a cup of coffee in front of me. No makeup artist, no script. Just my voice. The director asked, "When did you realize you weren't the problem?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. When I stopped asking for permission to be happy. The room went still. Even the cameraman looked up from behind his lens. It was the kind of silence that feels like truth. Over the next few days, we filmed everything: our story, the wedding, the aftermath. They used footage from Marco's camera, Ethan's short films, even clips of us wandering through Milan and the villa. Jessica wanted authenticity, and that's what she got: laughter, quiet moments, the raw beauty of imperfection. At one point, she asked me to describe my family. I hesitated. Complicated, I said finally. They love through control. I love through letting go. I think we both forgot that love can survive without either. When the crew wrapped that day, Ethan kissed my forehead. "That line's going to end up in the trailer," he said. I laughed softly. Then maybe it'll help someone else figure out their own story. Weeks passed in a blur of interviews, edits, and endless cups of coffee. The more I spoke, the more I realized how many people saw themselves in my story, not because of the wedding, but because of the quiet desperation underneath it. When the trailer was released, the internet lit up all over again. Clips of the villa flashed across the screen, the sun setting behind the olive trees, Ethan's voice, saying, "You're not too much. You were just never allowed to shine." My own narration followed, "Love isn't performance, it's peace." The final shot was the two of us standing under the archway, bathed in gold, the words, "Love over obligation," fading in elegant white text. Within hours, the trailer had millions of views. People shared it with captions like this: "This is what healing looks like." Hashtags resurfaced: number, love over obligation number, authentic living number, Olivia Cole. I tried to stay grounded, but it was impossible not to feel the weight of it all. A few nights after the trailer dropped, my phone buzzed with a message from Grace. Mom watched the preview. She cried. She said she didn't realize how much she'd silenced you. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My mother hadn't spoken to me since the wedding. I hadn't expected she ever would. Ethan found me sitting on the edge of the bed, the phone still in my hand. "Good news?" he asked. I nodded slowly. She cried. He smiled. "Maybe tears are the start." The premiere came 2 weeks later. Netflix hosted it in a small theater in Santa Monica, intimate and elegant. I sat beside Ethan in the front row, my palms slick with nerves. When the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled, I braced myself. Watching my life unfold on a screen was surreal. The laughter, the pain, the wedding vows beneath the Italian sun, it was all there but seen through a lens that made it feel bigger than us. When my voice came in soft trembling, I almost didn't recognize it. I didn't choose this path to hurt anyone. I chose it to stop hurting myself. The audience fell silent. When the credits rolled, people stood and applauded. Not the polite kind, the real kind, full of warmth and empathy. A woman in her 60s came up to me afterward, tears glistening in her eyes. "You just told my story," she said. "I spent half my life trying to please people who never noticed. Tonight I feel seen." Her words broke something open inside me. Jessica hugged me at the end of the night. "You did it," she said. "You turned pain into purpose." I smiled, though tears threatened. I think the story did that for itself. After the event, Ethan and I walked along the quiet street outside the theater. The air smelled of salt and night jasmine. Cars whispered past their headlights, flickering across the pavement. "Do you ever wish it hadn't gone public?" he asked. I thought about it, sometimes. But then I remembered that it was never just about me. It was about everyone who's ever been told to stay small. He nodded, his thumb brushing over my hand. "You've changed people, Liv." "Maybe," I said softly. "But mostly I think they changed me." We stopped at a crosswalk, the traffic light glowing red. The reflection painted our faces in soft color. I looked at Ethan and felt the weight of the past few months dissolve into something simpler: gratitude, peace, love. "I spent years being the story my family told about me," I said. "Now I'm finally the story I choose to tell." The light turned green. We crossed the street hand in hand, the city stretching endlessly ahead. For once, the world felt wide enough to hold me. The room went dark as the Netflix logo appeared on the screen. The crowd quieted instantly, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. Ethan squeezed my hand as the first frame lit up the Italian sunlight, the olive trees, the sound of laughter. My voice came next, soft and unsteady. "I grew up believing love meant making myself smaller. But I learned that real love never asks you to disappear. The audience sat still, captivated. I could feel their silence like a heartbeat under my skin. When the documentary ended, the lights rose slowly, and for a long time no one moved. Then the applause began. It started as a ripple, one person clapping, then another, until the entire room was on its feet. The sound filled every corner of the small theater. I felt my throat tighten as strangers came up to me, tears in their eyes. A woman with silver hair grabbed my hands. "You just told my story," she said, her voice trembling. "I spent my whole life trying to please everyone. I wish I'd learned sooner what you learned now." I smiled through the tears burning behind my eyes. "It's never too late," I whispered. Ethan slipped an arm around me. "You realize what you've done," he murmured. "I think it's finally hitting me," I said. Afterward, we went outside into the cool Los Angeles air. The marquee above the theater glowed faintly against the night sky. A few people were still lingering outside, taking photos with the posters. Someone had written on social media, "This story heals people you'll never meet." It didn't feel like fame. It felt like connection. Over the next week, the documentary exploded. It was trending in over 20 countries. The hashtag number Love Over Obligation returned with a vengeance, flooding social media, with women sharing their own stories, sisters, daughters, mothers talking about boundaries, forgiveness, and choosing peace. I read hundreds of comments every night before bed. I called my sister for the first time in 10 years. I left a toxic marriage after watching this. I finally said no to something that was breaking me. Each message felt like a small luminous thread tying us together across oceans. But the moment that changed everything came quietly. 6 months after the premiere, Ethan and I flew back to Charleston. It was spring, the air heavy with magnolia blooms, the city washed in soft pastels. I hadn't been home since before the wedding, and every familiar street carried ghosts. The taxi turned down the old Oak Line drive to my parents' house. My stomach knotted. Ethan reached for my hand. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," I said, "but I want to." My father opened the door. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinner, but his eyes kind. For a moment, we just stood there, measuring the space between who we'd been and who we'd become. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. "Welcome home, sweetheart." The scent of his aftershave, cedar, and tobacco hit me like a memory. I blinked back tears. "Hi, Dad." He smiled, though his eyes were glassy. "Your mother's in the garden." The garden had always been her sanctuary, the one place she didn't need to perform. I followed the narrow brick path to where she was cutting roses, her straw hat tilted low over her face. She didn't turn around when she spoke. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure you'd want me to," I said. She set down her shears and faced me. Her eyes looked tired, softer somehow. "You look different," she said, calmer. "I am." She hesitated, then sighed. "Your film." It was hard to watch. But I did. I held my breath. "You always saw the world differently," she continued. "I used to think that meant you were defiant. Maybe it meant you were brave." The words cracked something open inside me. "I didn't make it to hurt you," I said. "I just wanted to tell the truth. I know." We stood there for a long time, surrounded by the scent of blooming roses and the buzz of distant cicadas. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You remind me of my mother when she was young," she said. "She never asked permission to be herself either." And just like that, the weight I'd carried for years, anger, disappointment, grief, began to loosen. When Grace arrived an hour later, she was glowing, her belly round with pregnancy. I laughed through tears when she said, "I hope you don't mind, but I'm naming her Olivia." For a second, I couldn't speak. Then I hugged her, breathing in the soft scent of jasmine from her hair. "You have no idea what that means to me." She smiled. "You showed me what love really looks like. Not the kind Mom always talked about, the kind that makes room for everyone to be real." We sat on the porch, the three of us, Mother, Grace, and me, watching the sun set behind the trees. It wasn't perfect. There were still silences, Small hesitations, old wounds we'd have to revisit one day. But there was peace in the air, fragile but real. When Ethan took a photo of us together, I didn't pose. I just sat there, hand on Grace's arm, my mother's shadow falling softly across mine. The light caught us all in a way that made me think, this is what healing looks like, not dramatic, not loud, but quiet and earned. Later that night, Ethan and I walked along the beach. The tide rolled in slow, steady waves, washing over our feet. The moon hung low over the horizon, bright and watchful. "You did it," Ethan said. "I didn't fix everything," I replied. "But maybe that's not the point." He smiled, slipping his hand into mine. Maybe the point was never revenge. Maybe it was understanding. We walked in silence for a while, the sound of the waves like a heartbeat beneath the stars. "I used to think closure meant everyone agreeing I was right," I said. "But it's not that. It's realizing I don't need them to." He squeezed my hand gently. "That's the kind of revenge that lasts, the kind where you stop needing an audience." I smiled, feeling the truth of it deep in my chest. "It's funny," I said. "For years I wanted them to see me. Now I just hope they see themselves." The next morning before our flight, I stood one last time on the porch. My mother's roses swayed in the breeze, their petals pale pink and white against the morning light. I thought about everything that had happened, the exclusion, the silence, the viral storm, and realized none of it defined me anymore. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in quietly in the spaces where you finally stop fighting. As we drove away, I looked out at the familiar streets of Charleston and whispered a silent thank you to the city, to my past, to the version of myself who had been brave enough to choose her own day. In the rearview mirror, the house disappeared behind a curve of trees. Ahead, the road stretched open, bathed in sunlight. And for the first time, I didn't look back. A year after the storm mornings had become quiet again, the sun slipped softly across the balcony of our Los Angeles apartment, painting everything in a golden haze. The city below was already awake, cars moving, people hurrying, but inside life felt still. Ethan was in the kitchen, humming, the smell of coffee floating through the air. I stood at the window with my mug, watching the light shift. On the wall across from me hung a photograph, our wedding arch in Italy, the olive trees glowing in the sunset. Beneath it, framed letters and stills from the documentary. I used to look at that photo and see rebellion. Now I saw peace. "It's been a year," Ethan said, handing me my coffee. I smiled. "A good one." He leaned against the counter. "Better than good." He was right. Life had changed in quiet, beautiful ways. The documentary had opened doors neither of us expected. We started a small creative studio that helped women tell their own stories, photographers, filmmakers, writers, who'd been told their voices were too much. Our inbox overflowed with messages from people who said the film gave them courage to start over. One email I read over and over was from a woman named Carol in Vermont. She was 59, divorced, and terrified to start again. "I didn't think women like me had time left for peace," she wrote. "Then I saw your story. I bought a one-way ticket to Italy. I'm learning to paint." I printed her email and kept it pinned above my desk. Every time I doubted myself, I read it again. That spring, Ethan and I decided to return to the villa for our anniversary. When we arrived, it was exactly as I remembered the lake. Glimmering, the jasmine blooming, Marco waving from the terrace with a grin that could outshine the Sunday. "You two started a revolution," he teased as he hugged us. "The place has been booked solid since your wedding. Everyone wants their Olivia and Ethan moment." I laughed. "Then let's make sure they know it's not about the photos, it's about the feeling." He nodded knowingly. "Always." That evening, the air shimmered gold as the sun dipped behind the hills. We sat by the lake, a bottle of wine between us. The water lapped softly against the rocks and the lanterns flickered to life one by one. "It looks the same," Ethan said. "I don't," I replied. "The woman who stood here last year was still trying to prove something. The one standing here now doesn't need to." He reached over and brushed his thumb against my cheek. You've changed the meaning of revenge." I laughed quietly. "How's that?" "It's not about hurting anyone anymore," he said. "It's about healing yourself." I looked out at the water, its surface glowing like glass. Maybe that's the only kind of revenge worth having. The next morning I opened my journal and began to write. The pages filled easily, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting. I wrote about my mother, about Grace, and the baby, about the silence that used to scare me but no longer did. I wrote about freedom, the kind that isn't loud or dramatic, but steady, gentle, earned. When I finished, I sat back and smiled. It wasn't a confession this time. It was gratitude. A week later, back in Los Angeles, the studio buzzed with quiet purpose. We were in pre-production for our next documentary, Women Who Chose Themselves. It would follow women around the world who had broken cycles of fear, duty, and expectation. I wanted to show that choosing yourself wasn't selfish, it was sacred. One afternoon, I received a letter in handwriting I recognized instantly. My mother's. "Dear Olivia, I watched the film again last night. I see now what I couldn't before. You weren't trying to hurt me, you were trying to breathe. I'm proud of you even if it took me too long to say it." Tears blurred the ink as I folded the letter. It was the closure I didn't know I still needed. Forgiveness had arrived quietly, not in words spoken, but in the space they created. Grace called later that week, her baby cooing in the background. "She just took her first steps," she said. "What did you do?" I asked, laughing. "I cried," she admitted, "and then I thought of you." Hearing that, something inside me softened even more. The circle had closed. The wounds that once divided us had turned into reminders of how much we'd survived. That evening, Ethan and I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like constellations. The air smelled faintly of rain. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. The chaos, I smiled. "No. I think peace is underrated," he chuckled. "You'd make a terrible drama star." "Good," I said. "I've had enough drama for a lifetime." We watched as a plane crossed the night sky, its tiny light blinking. Somewhere, another woman was watching our film for the first time, maybe seeing a reflection of herself. I hoped she felt less alone. Before bed, I recorded a small message for the channel's new upload, a short behind-the-scenes clip from our studio. My voice sounded softer, now lighter. "Hi everyone," I said into the camera. "If you've followed this journey since the beginning, thank you. I never imagined my story would reach so many hearts. But the truth is, it's never really been just my story. It's ours, the story of anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet, to shrink, to settle. You don't have to. You're allowed to choose peace, even if it means walking away from what doesn't love you back." I paused, smiling at the lens. If this story meant something to you, share it. Tell me about your journey in the comments. I still read every single one. And if you believe, like I do, that healing is a journey worth sharing, stay with us. There are more stories to tell, more hearts to remind that it's never too late to begin again. I hit record off, sat back, and exhaled. Outside, the night had turned silver. The city was still alive, but it felt quieter somehow, like it had learned to breathe with me. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "What did you tell them this time?" he asked. "That peace is contagious," I said, "and that they should stick around for what comes next." He laughed softly. "That sounds like you." We stood there together, the hum of the city beneath us. Somewhere far away, the tide of life kept moving. Women finding their voices, stories being rewritten, families mending storms finally passing. As I looked out over the horizon, I thought about everything that had led here. The rejection, the defiance, the healing. It no longer felt like a wound or even a victory. It just felt like truth. I reached for my camera, lifted it toward the skyline, and clicked. The shutter's sound echoed through the quiet apartment. Some storms break you. Others set you free.